Start the recording. And we're going to move on to hearing from Cal Recycle staff about the regulations that they have developed to implement this legislation. And so Brianna Lara, great last name, Brianna, who is an environmental scientist and the local assistance and market development liaison for Santa Clara County, is going to lead us through a presentation. And a little later, we'll have time for Q&A with Brianna as well as Kara Morgan from Cal Recycle. So with that, Brianna, you should be able to share your screen and let's go.
Okay, just give me 1 second here. Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for having us here to present on SB 1383. This presentation is just going to be a high-level overview of the requirements for compliance. So why is 1383 so important? Organic waste comprises half of California's disposed waste stream. 13% of that is our food waste. And this is happening while so many people are going hungry every night in California. Another reason 1383 is so important is the fight against climate change. SB 1383 passed in 2016 as a part of California's larger strategy to combat climate change. So the law was designed to reduce global warming superpollutants like methane, which is up to 85 times more potent than carbon dioxide. SB 1383 is a statewide target that requires California to reduce organic waste disposal by 75% and increase edible food recovery by 20% by 2025. Organic waste is defined broadly in the regs and includes food waste, paper, cardboard, green waste, organic textiles and carpets, lumber, wood, biosolids, digestate, manure, and sludges. Cal Recycle has been collaborating with jurisdictions and other stakeholders over the past few years to complete the regulations that were final as of November 3rd of 2020. While the regulations take effect in 2022, jurisdictions have to plan now so that they can be in compliance by January 1st of 2022. There are many benefits if we successfully implement California's super pollutant reduction strategy, including environmental benefits such as fighting climate change, improved air quality, and less landfill waste, providing millions of meals to Californians without enough to eat, and creating thousands of new green jobs. So here are some of the key implementation dates throughout the rulemaking process. The most important dates to note are that the regulations become enforceable on January 1st of 2022. This means that starting January 1st, jurisdictions must have their programs in place and Cal Recycle can begin enforcement actions of jurisdictions and other entities. In 2024, jurisdictions will then be required to take enforcement against non-compliant entities. This slide provides a brief overview of the program requirements that jurisdictions will be required to adequately staff and resource. Jurisdictions will be required to provide organic waste collection services to all residents and businesses. This is what we refer to as automatically providing service or universal service. The resident or business is automatically provided the service rather than just subscribing to it. The regulations standardize container colors across the state to be fully implemented by January 1st of 2036 and require a jurisdiction to place a label on each new container or lid provided to the generators starting in 2022. Jurisdictions or their hauler must monitor containers for contamination. Jurisdictions can issue 3 types of waivers to generators, which are de minimis, physical space, and collection frequency. The regulations also place requirements on residents and commercial businesses. Jurisdictions must also conduct annual education and outreach to all generators. This includes info on methods for the prevention of organic waste generation, recycling organic waste on site, and sending organic waste to community composting. This also includes information regarding programs for the donation of edible food. Jurisdictions must also procure certain levels of recovered organic waste products like compost, renewable gas, or electricity from biomass conversion. Each jurisdiction will have a minimum procurement target that is linked to its population. There are requirements to purchase recycled content paper and paper products if the price and performance is comparable. Cal Recycle will be notifying jurisdictions of their target prior to January 1st of 2022. Each jurisdiction must also plan for adequate capacity for recycling organic waste and edible food recovery. Each county will lead this effort by coordinating with cities, special districts that provide solid waste collection services, and regional agencies located within the county. SB 1383 extends beyond your waste management and recycling operations staff. This slide shows that every department within local government will be affected and have a role to play. Each department will need to understand how SB 1383 impacts their work. Jurisdictions should be thinking and planning for the staffing that they will need, what responsibilities department staff will have, whether they will task direct service providers to staff some activities, and whether they will contract with other entities such as the environmental health inspectors or consultants. Jurisdictions are responsible to implement edible food recovery programs in their communities. This includes providing education and outreach, assessing capacity of existing edible food recovery and expanding existing infrastructure, conducting inspections of Tier 1 commercial edible food generators and food recovery organizations and services beginning in 2022, and adding inspections of Tier 2 commercial edible food generators beginning January 1st of 2024. SB 1383 related inspections of food recovery organizations and food recovery services will be limited to verifying that the record-keeping requirements have been met. Inspections should be at a level or rate that is sufficient to adequately determine compliance. Annual inspections of Tier 1 and Tier 2 generators is not required. Beginning in 2024, jurisdictions must take enforcement action on commercial edible food generators that are out of compliance with the edible food recovery requirements. So by January 1st of 2022, jurisdictions are required to have an enforcement mechanism or ordinance in place. Between January 2022 and December of 2023, jurisdictions need to identify businesses in violation of the regulatory requirements and provide education materials. Businesses, or beginning January 2024, jurisdictions must take progressive enforcement action against organic waste generators that are not in compliance. The progressive approach allows for notification to the generator and provides time for compliance before penalties are required to be issued by the jurisdiction. CalRecycle sets maximum time frames that a jurisdiction has to issue a notice of violation and penalties. The jurisdiction then has the flexibility to develop its own enforcement process within those parameters. An early robust education program will minimize the amount of enforcement action needed. If a jurisdiction is automatically providing service, this further minimizes the need for enforcement actions. To reduce reporting, jurisdictions are required to maintain records and keep information in an implementation record. Each jurisdiction is required to report to the department annually on implementation and compliance with the requirements of SB 1383. In the case of entities such as public universities, school districts, and federal facilities, CalRecycle will be directly responsible for ensuring compliance. However, jurisdictions are still required to provide education and outreach. CalRecycle will be evaluating a jurisdiction's compliance and will be establishing a process for conducting jurisdiction compliance evaluations. SB 1383 is a statewide target and not a jurisdiction organic waste diversion target. The department has included some aspects of flexibility and enforcement that is similar to the AB 939 good faith effort requirements, but are tailored to the different nature of the SB 1383 requirements. Under the regulations, if CalRecycle determines that a jurisdiction is violating one or more of the requirements, then CalRecycle will provide compliance assistance such as checklists, model tools, and training. And although CalRecycle may begin penalty enforcement starting January 1st of 2022, the timelines for enforcement processes aren't triggered until CalRecycle issues a notice of violation. Once CalRecycle determines enforcement actions are necessary, CalRecycle will implement the process outlined in 1383. The regulations include a compliance review and enforcement process that allows for extended timelines under certain circumstances to come into compliance before penalties are issued. Penalties are imposed as a last resort after all of the other compliance actions have failed. So CalRecycle is helping jurisdictions in a number of ways, including the recently released 4 model tools, which is the Model Franchise Agreement, the Model Mandatory Organics Disposal Reduction Ordinance, the Model Organic Waste Procurement Policy, and the Model Edible Food Recovery Agreement. We also have case studies on jurisdictions that have set rates, funded infrastructure, and educated the public and elected officials. Recently published tools also include a best management guidance document for identifying Tier 1 and 2 generators, a procurement calculator tool, model language for amending a JPA, and organic waste and edible food recovery calculator tools to help with capacity planning. Our staff also can help individual jurisdictions with the implementation tools as necessary. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and I'm sure we will have questions after the next presenter.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brianna, and so quick as well. I am very impressed. Now we're gonna dive a little deeper into the requirements for local agencies, and here to help us understand that is Rob Hilton. Rob is president of HF&H, which provides consulting services to public agencies who are procuring or negotiating solid waste contracts, and also helps them achieve their waste goals. And so, Brianna, you may need to stop your share so that Rob can start his. Rob, are you ready to dive in?
Good evening, everybody. Great to be here with all of you, and excited to be talking about SB 1383. So Brianna did a great job of setting up the regulations and giving us a good high-level understanding of what all is in them. I've been asked today to talk particularly about what local agencies will be doing around the monitoring, enforcement, and reporting components of the law. And so I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into that, including some discussion of different options that are available as you're evaluating your path forward. So important to start with, for every requirement, every operative requirement of the law, the collection programs, the ordinances, the edible food recovery programs, the C&D recovery programs, all of these important elements of the law that meet the goals that Commissioner Lara was talking about earlier have a component of them to monitor participation, monitor compliance, record that in some way, shape, or form, report it to CalRecycle to show that you are doing those things. And most of them have enforcement components to them. So this is a wide-ranging law, has been described previously tonight, and has a lot of key components to it. So I'm going to start to dive a little deeper into the particulars of what you're going to do with your monitoring program. Start with your monitoring program is going to be really driven by what collection program options you have. So the monitoring you'll do, the inspections that you'll do, will really be driven by whether you choose to have a 3-container collection system with separate recycling and organics containers, as most of your communities do, or perhaps a 2-container system where you're separating only the organics or only the recyclables from the trash stream. Or in some cases, single container systems where all of that material will be processed. Your choice around that will really define what you do in terms of monitoring for contamination, monitoring participation in the programs, what waivers and exemptions you might offer. So this is one of the key formative decisions that you will make in your system that will impact how you do things and the cost of things going forward. So as you evaluate that, one of the very first things that you're going to be confronted with is going out and working with businesses to set them up to get compliant. And as you're doing that, you'll be reaching out particularly to commercial and multifamily generators who don't already necessarily have the containers at their location, as most residents do. And you'll be trying to figure out how to set them up successfully to participate in this program. You'll be doing things like evaluating where they have space for containers, how frequently those containers need to be served to meet the needs of their businesses. And in some cases, you may find that they are appropriate for some exemption or waiver from the program. Now, this requires some effort on the part of the local government staff or contractors to go out and assess that situation, see if a waiver really is appropriate or if something else can be done to work with the business to get them into compliance. But the conditions for waivers under SB 1383 are you simply don't generate enough of a particular type of organic waste, and so you can be exempted from participation in that program. Or you don't have enough space legitimately to store the additional containers and to do the separation. In addition, CalRecycle and the regulations offered some flexibility for collection frequencies to help with cost impacts around this for certain generators under certain circumstances to be able to have their material collected every 14 days because it no longer has putrescible waste in it. So after you've set folks up, you're going to be assessing whether or not the community at large is in compliance, and you'll take certain steps to do that starting in January of next year. First, you're going to do compliance reviews of all of your commercial solid waste accounts, and that's your businesses and your multifamily properties that are generating over 2 cubic yards collectively of all of their materials. For those that are not in compliance, you're going to go out and you're going to perform some outreach to them, inspect their location, figure out how to set them up, hopefully successfully with service, let them know that the service requirement exists. And if necessary, you may proceed into notices to let them know that they're not compliant with your rules. You'll be doing work, and I'll talk more about this, to manage contamination. As we increase participation in the recycling system and in the organic system, it's critically important that we maintain the quality of those materials as they go off to markets. The surest way for this thing to fail is for us to send garbage off to productive markets that are fragile, frankly, already. You'll be working with the edible food recovery system that's been talked about a bit tonight, and inspecting those edible food generators and food recovery organizations periodically, particularly those that may not be in compliance with your programs. And you'll be responding to complaints that may come up and investigating those complaints that are credible. And in this case, the complaints are typically going to be things like people not being provided access to the recycling program or to the organics program as they're supposed to be. Commonly, tenants of multifamily environments or tenants in multi-tenant commercial environments, strip malls and things like that, that may know they need to be compliant, want to be compliant, but for some reason they're being prevented. So you'll need to work with those situations and others that may come up under 1383. Then by January of 2024, jurisdictions will be required to go into an enforcement phase in the relationship with their generators. And the enforcement phase is delayed by 2 years. So there's 2 years of time to really work on an educational basis and an outreach basis to successfully onboard all of these folks into compliance. But after that 2 years, if they've failed to come into compliance, jurisdictions will be required to do progressive enforcement. It'll start with a notice of violation, follow-up investigations, and if they are recalcitrant and don't come into compliance, there are requirements for some progressive monetary penalties in there. So one of the interesting practical decisions that local agencies are faced with is how to manage contamination in the system. And I already talked a bit about how important that is to do in protecting the environment that we are generally trying to protect. With regulations like this, we need to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences, and those contaminants really can be that. So in the regulations, CalRecycle set up a multi-party responsibility system for contamination management, and it really is a shared responsibility between jurisdictions, their haulers, their facility operators, and the enforcement agencies who oversee them. Now, it's not lost on most of you probably that the list of responsibilities for jurisdictions is the largest here, and there are a number of things that need to be done. Particularly setting up that contamination monitoring system and having the staffing and the resources to go out and identify those situations and educate people about them. It is important to note that the contamination system is not required to have a fine attached to it. That is a tool that you can choose to use, but you don't need to fine people in that enforcement structure simply because they've contaminated one stream of material or another. The law provides the opportunity, or the regulations provide the opportunity for jurisdictions to choose between two different approaches to contamination management. And different approaches will be appropriate for different communities that have different infrastructure and existing capacity. But the two approaches, the first is having people go around looking at a random sampling of containers throughout the community, lifting the lid, observing whether there is contamination, and in events where contamination is identified, educating that customer directly. The other alternative is to bring material back to a central yard, to a recycling facility, a solid waste facility that's appropriately permitted, and to sample that material through waste characterization. And in that case, you're going to probably find more contamination because you're looking more deeply through the material, but it'll be a bit harder to associate the contamination with the individual generator that was contaminating because it comes in a large truck mixed with other people's material. So in that case, the education will typically go back to an entire route or a segment of a route that it's likely that the contamination came from. So both of those approaches are acceptable under the regulations. And the cost effectiveness of each of them and the appropriateness of each of them will really depend on your local setup and infrastructure. You also get to do inspections working with the edible food generators, and this was discussed a bit in Brianna's presentation, so I won't go too deeply into it. The biggest thing here is figuring out who those folks are, and I really encourage folks that are working on this issue to take a look at the tools that CalRecycle's developed for how to identify who these tier 1 and tier 2 generators are. It's also important to network with your peers around this. The fact of the matter is that most of these tier 1 generators, particularly in many of the tier 2 generators, are chains or multi-location establishments. And so they're going to be working on this issue across jurisdictional boundaries. And so working with your peers that may be confronting similar issues may more rapidly accelerate compliance for these folks and get them through your system and off of your radar for inspections going forward. So those are the systems you need to set up primarily for the monitoring and inspection of the performance of the system. Then you need to start to think about your implementation record and the record keeping and reporting. So again, just like each obligation under the regulations having a monitoring requirement, almost all of them have some record keeping or reporting requirement as well. So the first thing to start thinking about, and many of our clients are already working on this, is building the implementation record. Having all of that information that sort of underpins and evidences your system in one, hopefully digital, location that's easily accessible so that when CalRecycle calls within 10 business days of that call, you've got the records and you can share with them where you are and demonstrate your compliance to them. I'm not going to go through all of the content of the minimum implementation record, but it is quite detailed and it includes, in many cases, either large documents like contracts and ordinances and things like that, but also lots of small documents, things like program records, education and outreach records, records of each individual waiver that you've issued. So for those sorts of things, you need to make sure that you've got a really good record storage system and maintenance system, and that you're keeping on top of those things as they happen, so that again, as CalRecycle comes and asks for demonstration of that, you can easily access it, and it's not a big burden on staff to respond. The good news is there are some tools being developed from multiple software companies and consultants out there to help local agencies manage these issues. And we're sort of nonpartisan with those that are out there. A number of them are quite good, but I think a tool like that is going to be really critical to successfully implementing these record storage requirements without adding a whole bunch of additional staff hours. So as you're maintaining that implementation record, once a year, you'll submit an annual report to CalRecycle, similar to the electronic annual report that jurisdictions submit to CalRecycle for AB 939, but there are some additional elements. Good news is all of those additional elements are stored in your implementation record. So if that is being maintained actively through the year, it should be fairly easy to convert that information over into your annual report. Again, CalRecycle is going to be developing those reporting formats and tools, and as soon as those are available, it'd be good to dive into those and start to understand the particulars of them and how your organization will aggregate that information and deliver it. The last issue I wanted to touch on briefly was the impact of this on local agency staffing and the rate impacts to your ratepayers and your community. And we've done almost 100 different communities SB 1383 planning or implementation projects at this point, many of them including fully negotiating agreements with their service providers and understanding what the rates are. And the impacts are all over the board, as you might imagine. We have some communities who, through luck of timing and market forces, did RFPs and ended up seeing reductions in cost as they were adding the services needed to implement SB 1383. We've seen many communities that are in sort of the 3% to 10% rate impact range, where they're adding certain administrative services, additional outreach staff and monitoring and enforcement resources to support this. But that doesn't add a whole lot to the cost of the system. On the other hand, we are seeing communities, particularly those that haven't established mature recycling and organic systems, who are seeing rate increases on the order of 60 or 90% to their ratepayers. And that is a real challenge for those communities to think about how to implement those sorts of rate increases at a time when folks are struggling. So the magnitude of your adjustment obviously is going to have a lot to do with where you're starting from. If you have most of the programs and services that are required, this should be a relatively easy lift and relatively cost effective to be able to add the resources you need. On the other hand, if you don't have recycling programs out to folks, if you don't have organics programs out to folks already, and you need to deploy a lot of those operational things, that's where the cost will come in. It's also important to note that right now, with all of the resource shortages and supply chain shortages around the country, we've also created our own little supply chain shortage in California around containers. As Brianna talked about, there's a requirement that you have color-coded and labeled containers. And so as agencies were ramping up to prepare for that, many of those containers were ordered. And as a result, the manufacturers are really strained. So that will be another factor that will sort of impact folks' costs as well as their implementation horizons. So that concludes my presentation for you today, and happy to be here with you all for questions later on.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Rob. I'm not sure.
It's your turn, Seth.
Well, this is the point in the program, Rob, that was so dense. I just need to swallow that for a minute. We have got a massive challenge here. The exciting thing is I think, have the experts on this call to address our questions, and we've allocated time in the session right here, right now, for folks who are on the call to start to enter some of their questions, big or small, and to actually do a little poll to find out, just take the temperature of folks on this call to understand how ready are we to deal with this massive opportunity. So, Cara, I think while you're maybe queuing up the questions, folks should take a minute and answer the poll. Let's get some data here. And if it's more your style to pose a question in the chat. I kind of see two tiers of questions right now. I always have my elected official hat on when I'm supporting you all. You need to know what's going on at Sacramento, and Derek Dolphy, my colleague from Cal Cities, asked the big picture question: how do we get resources from the state to help with these plans? Derek is here to answer questions as well, but maybe some from Cal Recycles can help us, because this sounds expensive, and how are we going to fund it? And then at the kind of micro level, I hear rate increases, changes of space, changes of increase collection. I hear residents rumbling. So let's hear from electeds here. How are those rumblings? Are folks satisfied? Is it you're just getting the squeaky wheels, which often happens when you step out in front and are an elected official? But this is our time to engage and take the temperature of folks on the call now. So I'm going to go over to the chat in the meantime to see what people are asking. And Cara, are you tracking these questions as well? And we can maybe get them to people later?
Yeah, I think that a couple of the questions were about the same person asked a couple of questions about bins and what that might cost and how many bins might be associated with this. I think Rob's just touched on that in his remarks. Giselle, if I think that your question is specific to is really going to be impacted by your local your current local situation, what you have for bins today, who your hauler is, and how that is how that's going to play out is going to change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Although Rob, you're welcome to jump in if you have something more specific you'd like to say to in response to Giselle's question.
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing Giselle's question.
It's actually in chat.
Ah,
And
oh,
a
needing
Would it help if
multiple
I read it?
computers. Saw that, yeah. So it's an interesting question about providing the multiple containers to generators as they need them. So some communities, we work with Los Gatos and Montecito and Saratoga a fair bit, and there are residents there, some of whom take 8 and 10 green containers because of the size of their lot and the amount of green material that they're generating and the need to aggregate all of that. And so some programs do afford that. Others, particularly folks that are in multifamily environments, mobile home parks, townhomes, things like that, where they don't have a lot of green material generated, might just need a small container for their food scraps and their food soiled paper. And so as you design your programs, you may want to be thoughtful of providing a range of services that really meet folks where they're at and really are tailored to the needs that they have in their particular environment.
Great, fantastic. And then Seth, it looks like there's a question maybe for Cal Recycle from Sue Beckmeyer. Can you see that question, Seth?
I saw Sue pose one a little earlier in the session, and I'm surfing for it now. Thanks for the posing a question, Sue. And I see you posed a question. No, I'm not seeing it. Sorry.
Okay. Where do local jurisdictions obtain the model ordinances and policies? So that's actually a Brianna question.
Hi, yeah, all of our model ordinances and policies will be on our website as they become available. And I know that Kara Morgan just also commented too, she was not given presenter capabilities, so I'm not sure that she'll be able to turn on her microphone to answer any questions.
I will, sorry, I tried earlier and she turned me down. I will promote her again and see if we can't connect her this time.
While you're trying to connect her, this model ordinance issue, I love the Cal Recycles will have them, but there's an art to getting an ordinance both understood by City Council and then onto the agenda and move forward. And based on your interest, cities here on the call, I imagine there'll be workshops and work from both the Peninsula Division and Cal Cities and Cities Association to try to get those model ordinances kind of packaged so that you can use them. There's a lot of detail there and there's a lot of customization that can happen. So, we've done reach codes, we've done interesting environmental strategies to get ordinances out there. I think this is a new challenge level for us. And I'm eager to work on it. But I'm just glad you're asking that question, Sue, and I'm sure others are thinking it as well.
Yeah, and we will actually have a little bit of conversation as well about local ordinances and what's going on in San Mateo and Santa Clara County as we wrap up here this evening. So we do have the opportunity for that. Kara, I think you are a panelist now. So if you wanted to jump in on the model ordinances and policies or otherwise, please do feel free to do so.
Hi, Kara. Thanks. Sorry I ignored you earlier.
It's okay.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us. Yeah, what I'm starting to see with respect to the model ordinances, jurisdictions are in different places. Some jurisdictions, we have a few jurisdictions that have actually passed their model ordinance. So if you'd like to reach out to Brianna afterwards, I can get you those jurisdictions if you want to reach out to them and see what's in their ordinance. What we are seeing are most jurisdictions are in the phase of drafting their ordinances. So the ordinances, they use the model ordinance that we have that HFH helped CalRecycle develop that is on our webpage. Most jurisdictions, their ordinances are with their legal team, being fine-tuned and being customized for their jurisdiction. I'm hearing a lot of jurisdictions are looking to schedule their first reading of their ordinance in December with a second reading in January. And typically an ordinance is 30 days before it's actually adopted. So I've been encouraging jurisdictions. Yes, the regulations do say January 1, but in light of all the challenges that jurisdictions have faced with COVID and, we're a little bit behind. But what I'm hearing from jurisdictions is we're going to get those ordinances passed so that by April 1st, I know April Fool's Day, jurisdictions can submit their ordinances to CalRecycle and report that they've got those completed. So if there are any jurisdictions tonight that need any follow-up assistance, please let me know. And then there was an earlier comment, Kara, about the containers. And I just wanted to point out, well, containers can be one of the most expensive parts of a program. And it's really important to note that the regulations allow for phasing in of containers. So if your jurisdiction currently has containers that are out being used, or they're already purchased and in the warehouse, but they're not compliant with the container colors, those can still be used. And they can be used until those containers need to be replaced or by January 1, 2036. We did that because we had a lot of comments from stakeholders about the incredible cost of containers. So we wanted to be sure that we're utilizing the containers that we have, but as new containers are purchased after January 1, 2022, they do need to be compliant colors. And that's for all generators, residential, commercial, industrial, et cetera. So back to you. Thanks for letting me answer a few questions.
Sure, wonderful. Thanks so much, Kara. Seth, you wanna put Kara on the spot for that for Derek's question?
I mean, Derek doesn't have I guess presenter capabilities here, so I'll just read it for you. And the question is from my colleague Derek up in Sacramento. It's now that the governor has signed the $60 million for SB 1383 implementation for cities and counties, how does CalRecycle imagine these funds will be distributed to local government? The $60 million question, if you will.
That's great. Derek, thank you so much. And I do understand we have a meeting coming up with you soon to get some feedback from the league. But what we've been doing internally in preparing for this is we've started to discuss how we're going to roll out this grant program. Now, so remember, there are a few pots of money, and one of those is the $60 million to assist jurisdictions with their 1383 implementation costs. So we've started brainstorming on that, what those types of activities will be that can be funded. We soon will be rolling out with our timelines because we're really committed to getting this funding out. We also hope to design the grant program similar to, for those of you who are familiar with the oil payment program or the city county payment program. So something's very streamlined for jurisdictions to provide CalRecycle with what their needs are, what they will use the funding for, and very kind of streamlined grant process like city county payment or the used oil program. So I hope, Derek, that helps answer your questions, but we're going to get that funding out as soon as possible. And I believe, I've heard from a lot of jurisdictions, and we're taking that feedback from jurisdictions. And also there will be an opportunity when we do present that at our monthly meeting for feedback from stakeholders as well. So I hope that helped answer the question.
I'm going to go back to the questions that are being posed. There's some macro questions here about waste stream and making changes to the overall system that I'd love someone to try to tackle. But there's also just the a real basic question of, must city staff do this monitoring and compliance? It's from Mayor Nagy. Hello. Or can it be done by the provider? Should it be done by the provider?
Well, that's a really good question. So the regulations are constructed that the jurisdiction can delegate activities. So in some cases, jurisdictions are delegating certain activities to their hauler. Some jurisdictions that are part of a JPA, for example, are delegating activities to the JPA. Some jurisdictions are delegating, for example, inspections to environmental health. So there's a lot of different ways that jurisdictions are using the delegation that's allowed in the regulations. The one thing that cannot be delegated to a hauler is the actual issuance of penalties. So that is an act that is something that a hauler can't, but the hauler can very much be involved in the monitoring. So as Rob talked about, the container monitoring, the route reviews, they can even be involved in some of the inspections. But again, providing that information to the jurisdiction so that then the jurisdiction then can take action if enforcement is needed. So I hope that helps answer that question.
It's terrific. You know, your response with JPAs is a great tee for our next speaker and our next presenter from Rethink Waste. It's quite appropriate to mention that this is where collaboration, multi-jurisdictional collaboration, is going to come into play. So Cara, if you don't mind, I'm going to move ahead and bring on my current Legislative Action Committee chair from the wonderful city of Redwood City, Alicia Aguirre, who just before I let you do your introductions, Alicia, I need to just let folks know that this woman has the dedication, and I'm pretty sure she can replicate herself and be in multiple places at once, because she is the most active and consistently engaged elected I've come across in my 8 years here. So Alicia, it's all yours to introduce Joe.
Thank you, Seth, for that very warm introduction. It's my pleasure to introduce our executive director on the board that I serve on as chair of the South Bay Waste Management. Joe LaMariana is the executive director, and he's in a way, it's a mouthful, South Bayside Waste Management Authority is also known as Rethink Waste. It's a joint powers authority formed by 11 local government jurisdictions in San Mateo County. It's been there since 1982. Rethink Waste owns and operates Shoreway Environmental Center in San Carlos, a transportation and materials recovery facility that receives all the recycling, composting, and garbage from its service area. Rethink Waste also provides solid waste industry technical support, advocacy, and implements important outreach programs critical to our local communities. And I can't have to tell you that Joe is an amazing executive director. We're so lucky to have him. He's on top of all of this and really pushing us and being part of the legislature and making things change. So Joe, pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And let me just reciprocate those warm words. It's just a joy to work with you and a pleasure. And it takes a team. This isn't a one-person thing. As we've been talking about this, hopefully you've gotten the impression that you need to have access to good resources. And some of those resources come from the industry. Some of them come from other city officials exchanging information and strategies. And ours related in getting a 1383 action plan approved by our board about a year ago. We've been working on this a couple of years. We've been working closely with CalRecycle for probably 4 years now on this topic, and we knew that it was moving along. So the first item I was asked to speak on is the ordinances. So CalRecycle does in fact have model templates that are a great starting point. In fact, we actually engaged the services of Kaufman and Associates out of Oakland to help us with the technical aspects of that as we roll them out to our 11 member agencies. The ordinances are the enforcement mechanism. So that's what gives the teeth in the compliance part of this law that I think is going to be really, really an important part of participation. So where we are with the ordinance process, we had 3 steps. We went to our technical advisory committee, which consists of representatives from each of our member agencies. They're at the staff level. We got feedback and direction from them. We then brought it to our board. We got feedback and direction and approval by our board. And now we're in the process of going out to our 11 member agencies elected bodies. So we have elected bodies, 11 elected bodies, 56 total elected officials. And we're now in the process of having study sessions at each of those cities and the county, et cetera. We've completed 7 and we have 4 more to go. So we're in a good place there. We're also projecting to pass all of the ordinances through each of those elected bodies by January 1st, 2022, and be in full compliance of the law. So we feel like we're in a very good place there. And we've gotten great feedback and also great participation and frankly, ownership. As we've explained what this law is and what we're trying to do and what the benefits are, we live in a really great part of the universe here where people really get it and understand. And so we've got their buy-in in that. I was also asked to speak about outreach to businesses and residences. We've got a 2-year implementation plan. We've started with, as I mentioned a moment ago, these study sessions that were being conducted with each of our member agencies. So that's going on in conjunction with the ordinance consideration. So each of those, of course, is a Brown acted meeting. So you have the elected officials, you have the staff, you have members of the public who are all engaged and listening in this. In addition to that, we're hosting a series of digital town hall meetings. We had our first one about a week ago. It went very, very well. We've got another one planned for October 27th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. If we feel like we need more, we'll have more. We've got the template down and the idea is to get the word out. In addition to that, our staff is working in conjunction with our member agency staff and our member agency elected officials to create a multilingual outreach plan. That plan is in development now. We plan to use digital and traditional tools to get the word out. And that would include one of the easiest and best ways to do it is to tap into each one of our member agencies has an electronic newsletter that they send out periodically. And they're always looking for content, and boy, do we have content. There's a lot of content here. So with all of that, that gives you some overview of where we're at here. I'll also address a comment that Rob Hilton alluded to earlier. So our program has an existing 3-cart system. So I think we're very fortunate to have that as a starting point for compliance of this really important bill. So with that said, we have targeted the non-participating organics, accounts, the commercial and multifamily accounts that are currently non-participating in the organics. So right now we've got 11,000 commercial accounts. There's about 7,600 of those accounts that do not have organic service at the moment. There's probably a 10% factor that some folks, as we discussed earlier, have the de minimis waiver capability or the space capability or the frequency capability. So that brings us down to about 6,800 commercial accounts and property owners for multifamily that we're going to be targeting over the next 2 years in this phased approach for implementation. So those are, and I'm sure anticipating one of the questions, we've done enough program level planning on this where we're thinking that the impact, the rate impact to our ratepayers above and beyond normal CPI is going to be somewhere in the 3 to 7% range for the first couple of years. And then it's going to plateau out wherever it actually plateaus out. So that concludes my remarks on those two topics. I will just also throw out a very important item. This is not front of mind for a lot of folks at this time, but it's very much front of mind with my colleagues and our planners for this implementation. And that is this law has very, very aggressive requirements to bring finished compost and mulch products back into our communities, which we fully support. We think that's a great and necessary market development need to make this whole program work. But we would like to work with CalRecycle to find some options, because we're a highly urbanized area. And when you do the formulas, there's a very large amount of material that is supposed to be coming back in our jurisdictions, and we're scratching our heads in terms of where we're going to put this stuff. And this is even with very aggressive and favorable planning in this. So, we'll be reaching out to other jurisdictions to see what they think too. But basically, those of us who are at this planning, this essential junction in planning right now, are agreeing that this is a big lift, and we would welcome the chance to work with CalRecycle's management team to look at options on that. So with that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joe, for your presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Fantastic. And we will also tap over to Santa Clara County for a few moments and get some insight into where they're at. And you might have noticed in the chat, there have been a few folks that have posted links, including Stop Waste, to their countywide ordinance. So please do refer to the chat as well. And now we're going to hear from Michelle Young, who is a senior management analyst for Santa Clara County, and she chairs the implementation committee for the Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission in Santa Clara County. And she's going to talk to us a bit about status in my home county.
Absolutely. Thanks so much to everyone. This has been such a great evening so far, and I'm thrilled to be here. On behalf of the 15 cities in Santa Clara County, I'm going to be talking about the coordination we're doing in a decentralized model. So unlike a JPA situation, we are in a decentralized city by city implementation, but I am going to talk a little bit about what we're doing to coordinate. And if you can tell me if I've got the slides showing. I just have a couple of slides to help keep me going. Are we good on slides? Can somebody give me a?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And you can see, shout out to CalRecycle. We have been using their tools extensively, and this is their presentation template, which I've modified multiple times for various different audiences. So for tonight, we're going to really focus on some of the next steps that the cities in Santa Clara County are implementing, with the focus on the January 2022 deadline. Cities throughout the county are very busy with the myriad of responsibilities that you've heard about in the other presentations, but I wanted to focus for the electeds tonight on some of the things that might be crossing your agendas sooner than later. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. The first of which, again, been discussed quite a bit, will be the ordinances. And so depending on the cities, we have some cities who are presenting two separate ordinances with solid waste and edible food, some which are integrating them, but I've presented them separately just to tease out a couple of the key points. And as was mentioned in the chat, Santa Clara County is very much online to get their ordinances approved before January. Most cities are going in October and November. So as Kara mentioned, we are in attorney review right now. So what we're doing is we are using our 1383 subcommittee of all the cities to really share information and bring ordinances from other cities that we found, resources from CalRecycle. We're sharing language for our staff reports, et cetera. So rather than a JPA where we have a centralized planning and implementation plan, we are trying to share resources to mitigate recreation of the wheel, as it were. We're also balancing the outreach about the collection services. So because the cities work independently, they will be creating the outreach plans with their haulers and within the cities. But we do use countywide funds that come from solid waste planning fees to do some communal outreach as well. And so we've used some of those funds to create outreach and education that benefit all of the cities. And so that is managed through our public education committee, so that we can identify things like waste reduction that impacts all cities regardless of what types of systems they have. And you can see from the graphics I've chosen, we have in Santa Clara County between 1 and 3 cart systems, with some cities even having a 5-sort system with split carts and a variety of options. So we have the whole gambit of the types of collection systems throughout the county. So we have to be judicious about how we do overarching education that would reach all county residents, so that we're not confusing people. But we are reworking the website so that we have a list of all the cities so that people can easily, through a one-stop shop, find everybody's how to recycle. You've heard a lot about this, but just we have identified through our conversations again and again some of the key changes that we're really preparing for. We're preparing our elected officials for and staff. Again, as you've heard, the mandatory collection and reporting, again, depending on the program, where they are with a 3-cart system, but most all of the Santa Clara cities already have organics collection. So we are well on our way there. Some of the provisions that we've been discussing are the changes to collection permits and self-hauling regarding the organics materials that have to be handled in a certain way. And again, as Rob really talked about, inspection and enforcement. So the teams are talking about that quite a bit. Again, in terms of the enforceable mechanisms that we need here for procurement, this is something that we're also going to be seeing coming across council and board agendas in October and November. Most cities are using their environmentally preferable procurement policies. Say that a few times fast. And so those policies in most cases are going to the boards and to the councils in the fall. And so they're adding in the provisions that will specify the materials that need to be purchased by the cities. Some of the tools that we've been sharing and discussing and teasing apart that hopefully everybody has found are the calculator tools. So that this is a template tool where you can put in a variety of different materials that you might want to procure and look at different mixes. If I bought this much compost, how much mulch would I need? If I can buy power, how much compost do I need? So it's a really neat tool where you can kind of put in some scenarios and look at that. The other thing that's recently come out and has been very helpful, and we had a meeting, a discussion about that the other day, is the reporting template for the implementation record. And so cities are taking a deep look at that, looking at going backwards from what we need to present every year in our annual report and making sure that all the program provisions are built such that we have those records that Kara was talking about in our first reporting period. So that has been another valuable tool that we've been discussing as a group. Procurement is probably one of our most frequent group sharing topics because, as was mentioned earlier, it is a big strategic effort. And so cities are sharing strategies that they're using both in their procurement policies, but also to connect with other departments and really learn what's happening in the different departments. including parks and planning, et cetera, roads and facilities and things like that. But we've also had multiple conversations about regional opportunities. So the county being bordered by quite a lot of agricultural land, we are looking into a couple of options to do some carbon farming projects, which would be a great opportunity for cities to invest in local carbon farming projects, which would meet their procurement target and then also some of their carbon targets as well. So there's some neat opportunities through Zero Footprint and our Ag Resiliency Initiative in Santa Clara County, where we're looking to invest in that way. And then in the requirements, we need to do an organics processing capacity analysis. And that is underway. We've completed the procurement on that, and we are getting ready to start that study. And that will help us to understand what the infrastructure looks like in the longer term as all these organics hit the processing infrastructure, to make sure that we are all set and identify where we might need to invest in the future. Some of this grant money that's coming through the state, we hope. And then finally, our edible food recovery program is a slight departure from what we've been talking about previously, in that all the cities have really decided that a countywide effort is the most logical way to manage this program. And so we will be implementing an MOU amongst the cities to manage this program centrally. We have already had the great privilege to work with joint venture over the last year to do some of our strategic planning, and the Technical Advisory Council recently awarded them a 2-year management contract to manage this program and bring the cities and the steering committees through the implementation process over the next couple of years. And the first big effort that we did, of course, was to identify our tier 1 and more recently tier 2 generators. It is a big project, but we felt pretty good about that. And over the summer, we actually did direct outreach to our generators. You can go to our sccfoodrecovery.org site and see the tools that we've built for generators in terms of connecting to food recovery organizations and finding all the steps they need, including templates and reporting tools and things like that to get started. So that's been a big lift. And again, we've used central resources to with outreach and education firms to get that set up. So that's been excellent. And similarly, we'll be using those centralized resources to develop a reporting tool where we can collect all the information from the generators and the food recovery organizations. Our biggest effort to date has been the modification of the model ordinance. So again, each city needs to implement their own ordinance. And at this point, we do not have an MOU that requires all of them to have the same ordinance, but we've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months to assure that they understand the importance of having a standardized ordinance in order to streamline the process for businesses and food recovery organizations that function in a regional effort, not city by city. So this has been a really big effort where we've had multiple meetings and webinars and gotten folks on board. And what I'm seeing in folks' drafts ordinances that they're taking forward, they are taking the tool that we've spent so much time on and really bringing it forward as ready to go to their legal teams. So that's exciting. And those ordinances, again, are going across the line in most cases in October and November. I mentioned the joint venture Silicon Valley 2-year plan. They also won the bid for our food recovery capacity study that is required by the state, and that is already underway in conjunction with the outreach and analysis that we've been doing initially with the tier 1 and tier 2 generators. So they are underway with that study. And then ongoingly, we will have the MOU and the subcommittees, which will continue to answer the big questions that have been brought up today, like how are we managing ongoing inspection and enforcement? and things like that. So it's really been a wild ride so far. And I think all the cities, you can see the folks in the attendee list, we have become a tightly knit group. And I appreciate all the sharing that everybody's done to make this again, a collaborative effort in a decentralized county. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. That was great. It was really helpful to hear a couple of different models that are going on in the region, a couple of different approaches, the more centralized versus the decentralized. And as I mentioned, Stop Waste staff also posted a link to work that they're doing. There are other jurisdictions that are here that are not SBWMA or Santa Clara County. We aimed for the center of Silicon Valley when we were developing tonight's agenda. So I know that we didn't capture everybody's situation on the ground, but I want to just thank people for taking the time to attend, even if their local jurisdiction wasn't covered in depth. I think that Seth wanted me to ask one more poll question, so I'm going to throw that out there as we wrap up. And Michelle, did you have something else?
I just had one more thing. Can you tell people how they can get access to the links that are in the chat and the answers to the question after the meeting? That might be really helpful.
Yeah, I will actually be compiling between the chat and the Q&A. And there was a question about sharing the presentations. I will tell you that I have seen the size of the presentations, and that's just not going to be feasible. Cal Recycle's presentation in particular is of epic proportions. It's not going to be possible to share everybody's presentations, but I will try and perhaps I can find a way to PDF some of the key info. But I will put together links and information from the chat and the Q&A and send it out with a link to the recording. For that, for now, it looks like we have some folks, let's see. Looks like folks are mostly interested in being put on a list and learning about future events. One person's definitely interested in more training right away. Seth, you want to help me in just closing out and thanking our friends here?
I don't have power. You have to activate me.
We have turned Seth off, so I've disempowered Seth. Here we go.
It was not intentional. I know it just was an afterthought. But it is an hour and a half in. Thanks for filling out the poll. Cara, it is a joy to work with you. I feel the energy that you bring to this. I think I'm collaborating with Joint Venture Cities Association. I think hearing about the different approaches in both San Mateo and Santa Clara is an eye-opener. The distributed approach versus a JPA approach. I think we're going to have a lot of really deep insight really quickly here. So I think I'll take the responsibility of finding out what those insights are and trying to repackage it. And I'm committed to staying on this topic, Cara, as long as we need to.
All right. Well, that sets a high bar indeed. We'll take this opportunity to again thank all of our panelists tonight. I really appreciate your time and the effort that you put into your presentations. And thank you so much. And I hope to see you at a future event.